for joining us today for From the Experts at for SantM audience. Um, I
Thank
have
you for
read your
having
book.
me.
I have read your book, and
You-
I was introduced to you by a great friend who is a great admirer of yours. So it is our honor to have you here. I know a lot about you, but I want you to tell us, our audience, about you and your background and who you are.
wow, where do I start? I like to say I'm a little country girl who came into corporate America not knowing what corporate America was and um, made it to levels I never would have imagined. My family comes from a small town called Ellery, South Carolina. That's where the name of my business hails from. It was my great grandfather on my mother's side and my great grandfather on my father's side who started a little church in Ellery, South Carolina called Brown Chapel AME Church. It was they who approached a local landowner in South Carolina asking for um, land on which to erect a small shack for a church for the blacks in the area to worship. And from there, I say, comes all of my history. My mother and my father both grew up in the same little town. They both are descendants of these two men who started this church in South Carolina. Um, mother and father met, and they were children of sharecroppers, and they met in the cotton fields of South Carolina and had three children, and I am the youngest. When I visit Brown Chapel Church, which is still standing, many generations later, four churches later, four buildings that is later. Everybody who's ever meant anything to me are buried on those grounds. So all of my grandparents are in the same cemetery. Both my mother and my father and all of their siblings are in the same cemetery. And then, but my brother is there as well, who, if you read my book, you know that my brother
Yes.
committed suicide when I was in high school. So I like to visit those grounds, and I start with my great great grandmother, Winnie, who was born a slave. And by the time I make it to the other side of the road, all sitting within cotton fields still today, the pain of both Winnie's um, upbringing as well as the pain of my mom's exit from this earth all sort of hit me in one visit. And so when people ask me, who am I? I'm a little girl that are descendants of slaves from South Carolina who also a product of a broken family who had no idea what corporate America was, much less to achieve all that I was so fortunate to achieve. And so today I run a company called Ellery Talent Strategies where I serve as advisor to boards and CEOs about how to create more Valerie Rainfords because they're out there. They just need the organizational support, the infrastructure, and individual support to become who God destined them to be.
Fantastic. But then before you started your company, which is quite recent, only 7 months, 8 months now, what were you doing before? What were some of your leadership roles?
Yeah, so I retired from JP Morgan after 12, almost 13 years. And before that, I was at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York for 21 years. So, um, my story is that, I went to Fordham University, the only school that I applied to, by the way. On the heels of my brother's death, I didn't want to be too far away from my mom, and we lived in the Bronx. And so I applied to Fordham University, got in, and shortly after 1 year at Fordham, my mom committed suicide, and I dropped out. When I went back with a vengeance. Graduated from Fordham, secured an interview with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York through the Career Planning and Placement Office at Fordham. Spent 21 years there, 14 jobs later. Uh, and it wasn't because I didn't do any one job well, it was because I always got tapped to move on to another business. My skill was in change and transformation. And I like to say it was because I went through a lot of change and transformation as a kid. I became an expert at it. And so 21 years, 14 jobs at the Fed, running everything from, accounting operations to the discount window, uh, the gold vault, like all the things that people know the Fed for. Yeah, I did a little bit of that over my 21 years to rise to become the most senior African American woman in the Federal Reserve System at the time. And I happened to be running corporate real estate when I was approached by the president of the New York Fed to, he also saw my passion around diversity. So while I was running corporate real estate, was also advocating for the Fed to start a diversity program. I'm very proud to have started those, created the first women's network at the Federal Reserve, helped hire the first chief diversity officer. And it was in that capacity I was out speaking at a women's conference on behalf of the Federal Reserve, where someone in the audience who had known of me from JP Morgan started approaching me to join JP. So I joined JP Morgan in 2007, just before the financial crisis. And found myself doing many of the same things there that I had done at the Fed, right? So I was following the moments of change, following the crises from, mortgage and robo signing, to the compliance crises, the acquisition of Washington Mutual, were all things that I was working on at JP Morgan, all along the way, by the way, advocating for diversity. And so it was about 4 years ago that the chairman of JP Morgan, well before his time, understood that the company and the country needed to do more for Black talent. And he was not looking for an HR leader. He was not looking for a diversity leader. He was looking for a business leader. And I was approached to take on that role, which I did. Started with a blank sheet of paper and created what is now called Advancing Black Leaders. So for 3 years, worked at that role, creating the firm's approach to internal Black strategy. And about a year ago, I say our chairman gave me an incredible gift as we were breaking records. His thought was it wasn't good enough for us, for JP Morgan, to be learning and not share it with others, and suggested that I go out on client visits, which I did. And that's when I saw there were so many companies who wanted to model what we were doing at JP Morgan. And I came up with the idea for starting Ellery Talent to serve many more companies who wanted to do the same thing. So the journey started in business, started at the Federal Reserve, started with me doing diversity in my spare time, as many people do. And it became the thing that I now love to do. It's incredible that I get to spend my day advocating for Black talent strategy. I think it's unfortunate that the world had to watch George Floyd be murdered callously in the streets for others to pay attention. But I've been at this work for a while and just fortunate to be one of the only people who have actually driven change in it in corporate America.
Valerie, you work a lot with Fortune 500 companies, large corporations where they have thousands and thousands of people, employees, and also a lot of resources. Um, Myself, I'm a founder of a startup. What would you recommend startups and smaller corporations to put forward and think about diversity as they're formulating their company? What are some of the to-do list or the thought you would like to put into a lot of these startups?
Yeah. So my clients range. I have the large clients who are which I predominantly focus on data analytics and data strategy, right? Because I believe that CEOs have a difficult time um, sort of getting their heads around how to put strategy around this very emotive, amorphous thing called diversity, right? So I tend to come at it from how many jobs do you have? Where are you going for the talent? How are those talents making it through talent making it through the process? What's your talent management function look like? So the main piece of my practice is very sort of get to the facts and create strategy around that. For my smaller clients, however, who typically don't have a lot of that either started or have never embedded it into their practice, it still starts in the same place, and that is with the CEO. So I'm the executive coach around diversity to some CEOs, right? Like, how do they even, if the CEO gets his head in the right place, they can get the entire leadership team in the right place. They can create the practices from day one with the right intent. But if the leader of the organization doesn't understand what they're doing and why, or even where they want to go, to me, that's the first barrier, right? So the smallest of organizations are, tell me what's your goal? As I said to one CEO this morning, like, what's good look like for you, right? You want to lead this thing, but what is it in your mind you want to lead? Let's start there. What's your background in it? What are some of the things that you're uncomfortable talking about? What's some of the language that you need to get comfortable with? Um, one leader this morning, uh, you know, doesn't have anybody else that they can ask. What's the difference between, you know, racism, bigotry, white supremacy, white supremacist, all right. What? And by the way, one of them even said, like, so help me understand the D, the E, and the I. Like, why do people keep moving them around? Like, what's the difference between the D and the I? Like, why do I need the E? Diversity, equity, inclusion. But some of the language is so intimidating, and CEOs are in a very lonely place. It's not as if many CEOs have the ability to pick up the phone and call their peers, right? Like, because it's a competitive environment. And so I start with them wherever they are, but what I insist on is it starts with the leader of the place, right? If I've had plenty of organizations where the diversity officer called me, or senior Black leaders called me, or even a senior not Black leader called me. And what I say to them is, I'd be more than willing to have an introductory conversation with you, but the actual work has to start with the leadership of the organization and understanding like what their vision is. And if they don't have one, I'll help you create one, right? But it has to be based on what you want to drive, what you're comfortable in doing. So it's organic with the smaller organization.
So, I mean, also a lot of our clients or SantM listeners are middle managers. Also, next leaders to be the C-suites. So, how would you recommend these middle managers and current executives who are not in the CEO position to start thinking about it and start incorporating it, from their sort of individual bubble or group?
Yeah. It's the same as what I say to the people who are trying to educate their neighbor, right? I've had neighbors where we tried to have the conversation, and usually what happens is the same thing that happens with middle management, right? When someone who is either on your team or that you have a tangential connection with, and you start talking about the issue of diversity and even more uncomfortably the subject of racism, what typically happens is the conversation gets defensive. Those two people are different backgrounds. They don't understand each other's perspective. They have not lived in each other's experience, right? And what typically happens is the minute I say, you know, take for example, Black Lives Matter, what may happen on the other side is the person say, well, all lives matter. or blue lives matter, or, why not whatever lives matter. And what I say to folks is the minute that happens, the two people are not listening to one another, right? The minute that happens, one person is negating the other person's view. And unfortunately, we are at a time in companies as well as in the country where we're not listening to each other's sides, right? And that gap is um, that gap has a lot of ignorance in the middle. And I don't mean stupid, I mean cluelessness. So until we get to the point where we can engage each other in our own individual experiences and you don't feel the need to counter my view with your own, we're never going to be able to cross the bridge, right? So what I say to middle managers is if chances are your view is deeply rooted in your own experience. Those leaders who have opened themselves up to understand someone else's experience are more than likely to be those leaders who are on an inclusive leadership journey, right? But when you are not trying to learn someone else's view, um, not trying to understand how their perspective may be different than your own, how they have navigated corporate America differently than you, that's where there's this frozen middle, right? And I think that applies to many people, but most especially, I think it applies to middle management as well. Does that make sense?
Completely, completely. So I read your book in one sitting. I could not put it down. Your life is incredible journey, and it still hasn't ended. You still have long way to go. And I like to ask people this: how much do you think you are here because of luck, or versus tenacity, your hard work? And when I read your book, you had so many roadblocks. When you had that roadblock, you went twice as fast, three times as fast. Like you said, when your mother passed away, you dropped out of school, but when you went back, you were fierce. How do you do it? How did you do it? The encouragement, the stories, and the fact that not only were you satisfied with just getting a middle manager job, you were the highest ranked Black female woman at the Fed at the time. That is incredible. So, can you just tell us about your life and all the things that you went through and the emotional roller coaster, but how you made that into more of your advantage?
Yeah. So there's one word that you didn't say that I believe, and that is destiny. I really do believe. I can't explain it, but I do believe that I am doing exactly what I was put on the earth to do. I believe that this unique thing that I have come to doing was meant for me to be doing it. I don't quite understand why I had to go through everything I did to get here. That's the piece that I can't explain. But what I know when I wake up every morning and I just feel this warmth that I'm doing what God put me on the planet to do, and that is to be this person who can show the world that I'm not unique. I'm just an example of what can be. And I think again, I get goosebumps when I think about it, Mim, right? But some people say to me, like, are you clairvoyant? Like, how did you start a business focused on Black talent strategy pre the mess that we're in? And what I said to them is, I'm not clairvoyant, but I'm determined, right? And when I was talking to people about starting Valerie Talent and focusing specifically on Black talent strategy, they said, no one's going to hire you. No one's going to hire you just to focus on Black people. I said, well, it's the entryway because we are the most marginalized. And I'm determined to prove it. And when you get that entryway, you'll have the opportunity to improve it for all people. And you know what? I announced my business in September. My phone was ringing off the hook one day later. And so I believe that I'm supposed to be doing what I'm doing, but I also believe that it was perseverance. I had no idea. I had no idea, by the way, 2 years ago, I'd be doing what I'm doing today. Like, I had no idea. Like, it just hit me as I'm in these client meetings that my chairman suggested that I have, that the numbers of people who wanted to pick my brain on how to do this thing was another way for me to manifest this destiny that I think that I'm on. And I think if I had not pushed through all of the challenges along the way, if I had not, what I say to my coaching clients is stuff happens to you, but if you wallow in it for too long, you'll miss the lesson and the blessing. And so I think that what I did along the way, which my mother taught me, by the way, my mother taught me, okay, it happened, get up, brush yourself off, and figure out how you're going to learn from it.
Correct.
And that's what I did for years and years and years. And I said, the only thing my mother didn't do was on that day, 36 years ago now, when she got to that place where she was feeling like she couldn't go anymore, she forgot to get up and dust herself off and do what she had taught me to do. But that's all I knew her to do until that day that she took her own life. So I know that there's something else I'm going to be doing in a year, Min, that we'll do another interview that I haven't figured out.
I
But
hope so.
yeah, like every day, my husband laughs at me because every day I'll get a phone call from someone who wants me to do something. And I'm like, oh, yeah, they want me. Like, I don't even realize that I don't wake up thinking about how great I am or how great this is. I wake up thinking, how am I going to use this platform to continue to fulfill this destiny trip that I'm on? And this destiny trip that took a little country girl, a child of sharecroppers who didn't even know what the Federal Reserve was, who didn't understand anything about banking,
Yeah.
to be able to pick up the phone and there's a CEO that wants to know what I think
Yeah.
about how to advance their company on diversity. And I'm just going to keep doing that every morning.
Well, you talk about how you were a cashier while you were in, was it junior high or high school?
High school, seafood supermarket in the Bronx.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And you talk about how you were the best cashier and then you moved your way up. It's sort of that. And you have two daughters. They're, grown up. And how do you install, as a mom, obviously I want to install all the best practices for my children. How do you do that? What do you do? What do you tell your daughters?
now they tell me, like they are my biggest cheerleaders. They called me the other day. They like to call me. Well, I like for them, they figured out that I love to see them together. I love to see them supporting one another. So each night I get a phone call. Actually, this morning they woke me up with a phone call, both their faces in the FaceTime screen. And they're always curious, Mom, who are you working with now? What are you doing? Like you're so great. They are my biggest cheerleaders. And what I do now, they're 25 and 26 years old. And I just talk to them about the business. I talk to, and my kids are learning by me sharing even the vulnerable parts, right? Even the parts when, like, I just hung up with this client and that made me feel a little uncomfortable that I was on the phone with Mr. CEO that everybody knows. You know what like my kids are the ones who, as they were growing up, it was everything my mother taught me, right? Like, never give up. You make a mistake, you got to live with it. You know, you got to learn from it, but you got to keep going because you never know what God has ahead for you. And so now it has come to, they understand business and I'm explaining to them what I'm doing and they're learning from it and they're cheering me on every step of the way.
I love having not a grown-up conversation, not much younger kids, but I like to have a real conversation. Sugarcoat anything. This is how it is, and sooner or later you're gonna learn about it. And I think your approach is fantastic. We have 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna ask you some fun questions.
Yeah.
What are you reading now, or what is your favorite book?
Oh, amen. So, um, um, so I like romance.
Ooh!
I'm not reading anything very provocative right now because sometimes I just want to read something that doesn't require me to think. And I have a favorite author, Brenda Jackson. She has written over 100 romance novels, and I own every single one of them. Like I collect Brenda Jackson romance novels.
I gotta pick one up now.
Yeah, yeah. So I have a couple of them on my nightstand that I'm gonna pick up. I'm gonna pick up a new one.
Fantastic. And then now that we've been inside for, I don't know, I can't even count how many months we've been inside. What do you miss the most about the outside world? Travel, foods, seeing friends. 3 top things to do.
Well, right now I'm missing girls. My girls are in New Jersey. We're in Florida. I talk to them, as I said, at least once a day. Most of the time it's twice a day by FaceTime. So I get to see them, but I haven't had the chance to hug them in a while.
Yeah.
The same with the rest of the family, right? Like no one. I have a cousin that lives probably 2 miles away, and I haven't been able to see him.
Oh
Uh,
no.
yeah, my husband's twin sister is in New York. Brother, like we just have family, and the inability to see folks and hug them, I would say, is right up there with not having seen my kids. And then I would tell you, like, I'm zoomed out sometimes. I'm on Zoom, WebEx, Skype, or FaceTime for, I mean, the whole day.
I know.
I do have some clients that I wish that I could just go in and sit on the couch and talk to them, as opposed to trying to educate my clients via Zoom sometimes. It's hard. It's
Yeah.
not impossible, but I wish that I could do some of the coaching and advising that I do, directly with a client over a meal where you get to know them and how they think. So it makes the work a little bit harder to try to do this on Zoom, but we still do it pretty well.
Awesome. Well, Valerie, we're running out of time. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're super busy, and I really enjoy talking to you, getting to know you. I actually, people like you encourage me to move forward and work twice as hard when business is tough. So thank you so much for writing this memoir and sharing with all of us. You've been an amazing guest. Thank you.
And you have a pretty incredible story yourself. Like I'm so proud of you and the work that you did to step out and
Thank
create
you.
this new company. Like I just love the model. I love the idea. I'm glad that we were introduced. And
Yes.
I wish you all the best as well.
Thank you so much, Valerie. And enjoy rest of the week.
Thank you. Thank you. All the best to you.
Bye.
Bye bye.